Right. I stand before you a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male. I am probably in the history of the world the worst oppressor ever. Because my kind,
literally on the outside looking in.
My kind, throughout history, has typically been in power. Think about that. White Anglo-Saxon Protestant male. My kind throughout history has typically throughout history been in power. And those in power want to stay in power. And how do they stay in power? By oppressing others. By keeping others in their place. By keeping them down. This is the essence of what we're talking about in critical analysis. Mike?
Isn't that basically the conservative stance in all politics? Retaining power?
Would it be just the conservative stance?
Yeah, liberal stance is trying to get the power away from the elite.
They're maybe trying to get the power away from the elite, but they still want to have the power to be able to do that.
Spread wealth.
Spread the wealth, yes. But I need to be in power so I can make sure the wealth is spread the way I think it should be spread. And that is something we have to look at. I'm going to read to you today from Matthew 7, verses 15 through 23. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruit you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Likewise, every good tree bears fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus by their fruit you will recognize them. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons and perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Now, I'm not here to denounce Christianity. I stand in front of you proudly to proclaim I am a Christian. But that verse rings true with me because, again, throughout history, one of the worst groups at oppressing others has been Christians in the name of the Lord. Hitler tried to commit genocide among the Jews because Jesus told him to. The Crusades, the Salem witch trials, even the Puritans tried to drive out other Christians because they weren't Christian enough. I don't know a whole lot about Islam. I don't know a whole lot about Buddhism. I do not know a whole lot about Hinduism. Probably should know more about them. I do know in those other religions, however, that the group that gains the power typically tries to drive the other groups out. You think about in Islam, you have the Shiites and the Sunnis. Well, to each of those groups, the other group is the infidel, which is who the Muslims fight against, is the infidel. Okay? So what I'm trying to talk to you about today, what I'm trying to tell you today is we need to think about who has the power. How did they get the power? What are they doing with the power? And are they performing with that power effectively, or are they oppressing others? We'll get more into the top here in a minute, but the goal in critical analysis is not to interpret and understand, which is our goal typically in qualitative research, correct? Our goal in critical analysis, and this is the one method where we do this, we're trying to critique it and change it if necessary. If one group is abusing its power and harming another, we want to make a change. Now, who determines whether that group is harming the other? Us.
Preferably not that group.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that. We as researchers are trying to determine, is this group being harmed? Are they being kept from fulfilling their ultimate abilities? Okay, so that's what we're trying to determine. It gets its roots in Marxism, and Marx studies socioeconomic conditions and social classes, looking at, do the group with the most money, do they oppress the social classes so they can keep the most money? Are they sharing the wealth? Are they dependent on the government to take care of them, but then they control the government and who gets to give the money, who gets to give the support? Gets its roots in Habermas with the analysis of technical, practical, and emancipatory power. Do they have skills? Do they have the power because they have the skills to do things? You think about if there were a great flood, you know, say we lived on the coast and we were going to be flooded if we didn't build a dam and do something to protect our community. Well, you may have the rich people and the mayor and the city council and all these people who typically have the power in that community, suddenly they're giving away to the groups who have the technical skills, the engineering skills, the strong backs and arms to build the wall to keep the water out. Okay, so who has the power there? The practical power, do they have the knowledge, do they have the background? And then the emancipatory power, where we're trying to look and see who has power and shift it so that it's not being abusive. Freire. I read Paulo Freire, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, in one of my education classes while working on my PhD. Really changed my way of thinking about power and oppression. But he's looking at transformative and I hate that word, emancipatory education. That by getting education, we can either gain more power or protect ourselves from being overrun with power. Because throughout history, who's had the power? Those with the education. Okay? Well, the reason I said that to you, John, with what Freier's saying is not only is the oppressed, so you've got these in power, and they're oppressing this group over here, therefore this group is not able to reach its full self, reach its full fulfillment. I can't become the best that I can be because I'm being held back. But in so doing, those who are oppressing are actually oppressing themselves. Because I am so focused on keeping you down, I'm not doing what I can to lift myself up. I'm not reaching my full self because I'm trying to squash you. And that's the way he looked at those things. Okay, and that's some of the study that he had. All right?
Hypothetically, what if you are focused on reaching your full self, and through that focus, you're leaving others in your wake, which they interpret as oppression? See what I mean?
That they interpret as oppression?
That because they can't obtain or attain your same level of superiority.
Mm-hmm. That's where we get to the participatory action research, where we're looking at the power grab or the power dynamic in a culture, and we're actually talking to the people who are oppressed and finding out, why do you think you're oppressed? How do you think you're oppressed? What are those who are in power doing to oppress you? Is it that they're not supporting you? They've got their mind over here, they're minding their own business, doing their own thing, trying to get bigger and better over here they're not doing anything to you. They just aren't giving you any focus. Or are they taking what you have so they can stay in charge, so they can keep the power? So yeah, that's part of what we're trying to find out. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think.
You think? Okay. Maybe this helps it a little bit better. The idea in critical analysis is we're trying to look at the power dynamics. We want to find out who has the power, what class has the power, or what group has the power. We want to know how they got it. We want to know how is it negotiated. So Savannah and I, Savannah's got all the power, okay? She's oppressing me. How can I negotiate with her to get more power? And she may not even be intentionally oppressing me, but how can I negotiate with her that I can gain more power, that I can climb that ladder a little bit, that I can have more of an impact and more of a say? Okay. And then we're looking at what cultural structures reinforce it. what cultural structures reinforce it. Perhaps it's the government, I'll come right to you, Alex. Perhaps it's the structure of our government. Perhaps it's geographic lines. Perhaps it's in the roles that a certain class or a certain gender or a certain group are allowed to play. How is our culture and our structure, how is it reinforcing it? Because we can't fix it if there is a problem, it's determined there is a problem, we can't fix it unless we know how it's being held together, how it's taking place. Alex?
So like in India, like the Brahmins, they're the top class in India. And there's those other classes, there's 5 classes, or castes, or whatever, it's caste system, but the classes, whatever, and the Brahmins are at the top, so like maybe like study how the Brahmins are better than everybody else and why. That's what you mean by critical analysis?
Yeah, how they got there.
Okay.
How did they get to that point, and then what are they doing to stay there?
Okay.
And what can the classes that are not at the top, that are being oppressed, or that are being discriminated against, how can they climb back up?
Okay. Thanks.
This is just an example of some of the different studies that we do with critical analysis. Race theory, gender theory, management studies, or labor relations. This is one that I'm really interested in. And again, we talked about participatory action research. Out of the management studies is where you get a lot of the discussion about servant leadership. That management for so long was so focused on the task as opposed to the relationship, about getting the job done, about staying in charge, about making more money and lining my pocket, and I'm going to do it on the backs of my labor. Okay? And then a lot of research went into management styles and effective management styles and styles that really help the organization grow. I think of Colin's text, Good to Great, where he talked about the great leaders, the ones who really built their programs and continued them growing, were servant leaders, and they were working to find their replacement. Because I want to leave a legacy. I'm not here to run this company and have it be great while I'm here, and then when I retire or when I die, I just let it go to hell in a handbasket. I want it to keep going. This is my legacy. My name will be attached to this. So I've got to take Chase and I've got to train him up and get him ready to go, because he's going to be my replacement. Or maybe it is Alex, or maybe it's Aaron, or maybe it's Kristen, somebody that's going to follow after me, that they're going to be the next person. They're going to keep this company going strong. I can't do that if I'm working to keep you down here so I can be up here. So they've worked to become more servant leaders, and they're saying that servant leadership is more effective. Okay. That's pretty much it. But now, let's talk about it.
How do you go about getting this information? What are the primary tools that you're going to use?
A lot of it, like I said, we talked about participatory action research, and it's going to be taking the people within the organization or within the class or within that culture who are oppressed. And basically you're looking at who's not in leadership. And if they're not in leadership, those are the people that you're interviewing and you're talking to, and you're observing and within their structure, their culture, to find out what's happened. You talk to maybe some of the older people in the culture that are in that lower class and find out how did it get there. You're looking at maps, as part of your document analysis. Like I said, how's the cultural structure reinforce it? Is it that they've been placed in this lower area, this lower income area? So a lot of it's observation, a lot of it's document analysis, all the tools we've been talking about.
So you could pretty much use whatever one of the tools that research methods that we've talked about, and it becomes a critical analysis because of what you're looking at, not exactly how you're looking at it.
Yeah, yeah. The methods that we've talked about are what you're going to be using here. I mean, you could get in here and do an ethnographic study and be a part of that culture and go fully native, or just an observer, or just full observer, whatever approach you want to take. But you're a part of that culture, so you can be observing this to find out what is happening, to find out is there oppression taking place? Okay, because you may find that, kind of like what Jeff was saying, you know, as students, you may feel oppressed. You may feel that you're forced to sit in these horrible chairs. Well, it's not necessarily that you're forced to, you just never raised a voice. You've never united and said, we're not going to take it anymore. Hell no, we won't go, you know. Union now! You haven't done it. You're not necessarily being oppressed because your departments and your colleges are forcing you to sit here. You're the customers. You're the ones paying the tuition. You know, if you're a taxpayer, your tax dollars are going to the university to keep it going. Stand up as one, raise a voice, start a petition. Okay, that's one of the things in a democracy where we think, well, you can't have oppression in a democracy. Well, you can if the people don't raise a voice. You know, if they don't vote and go vote out the people who are in power and oppressing them. Okay, so that's kind of what I'm looking at. That's what's going on in this culture, that it's apathy. The only reason you're being oppressed is you don't care. And your leaders are like, well, they don't care, we're going to do what we think is best. And we're going to keep it moving forward. They may feel oppressed, and we're not intending to, but they're not telling us anything. John?
Wouldn't systematic oppression be a little different in like looking in that same lens? Because if someone doesn't, I feel like if a community doesn't have a certain amount of education or means to go about raising their voice, then they can't. So that's not necessarily saying that they couldn't be active in, if they were going to raise their voice, that they couldn't be active in doing that. But I'm trying to think of ways to analyze that critically if they don't have the means to do any of that. So you're trying to research a culture or a group of people that cannot just like really raise their voice because they've been so.
And what you're finding out. Now, understand where I say here, the goal is not to interpret and understand.
Okay.
You do need to interpret and understand so you can critique and change. So I'm interpreting what's going on here, and I've come to find out, well, the reason they're oppressed is they're uneducated. They don't know. So how do we change it? We find ways to educate them. We find ways to get them the knowledge that they need so that they can, whether they're going to be active or not, so they can be aware of what's happening. Okay.
In that scenario, who defines oppression? Yeah, I mean, John made a great point. Not aware, not educated, I mean, I have a personal experience of poverty growing up, but I didn't know what poor was until someone told me, and until they told me, I didn't feel poor, I didn't feel oppressed, I was just me.
And this
and then someone said, you're poor, and then I'm like, oh my God.
And the man is keeping you there, right? And the man is keeping you down.
See what I'm saying? So
yeah.
Who defines the oppression?
And that goes
because
to
there's bliss and happiness that you control for yourself until someone tells you that you're not happy.
Right.
You know what I mean? I don't know.
And this kind of goes to what Bum was saying, that isn't that, whenever I was talking at the beginning, isn't that the conservative mindset? Well, it is. But the liberal mindset then is to find out where these things are happening, and I'm going to be the one that tells you you're being oppressed. You may not think you're oppressed at all. You may not think you're poor at all. I don't want to go raise a lot of money. I don't want to make a lot of money. The more money I have, the more headaches I have. The harder I have to work to keep it. I'm not oppressed. I'm where I want to be. Okay? So then you've got to find out. Somebody's going to make that definition, or people are going to look at it. You know, you think of Selma, and people are going to look at that and say, they were mistreated, and there's not a whole lot of people who could argue that they were mistreated. There are going to be people who are going to argue, well, they should be mistreated, or they should be in that place. You know, they're black. Well, they don't deserve to be where we are.
And in that case, you're going to feel the oppression yourself. But I'm talking about, you know, this blissful, sort of uneducated. I don't know that I'm oppressed. I don't feel oppression, and until you told me. Thank you very much for ruining my day. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And a lot of this just comes from, as a critical analyst, I'm looking, and from what I can tell, what I can see, this smacks of one group trying to hold another down.
Yeah.
Or one group is discriminating against another. They're not being paid as well for doing the same work. They're not able to get the same jobs. They're forced to sit at the back of the bus. They can drink out of the same water fountain. Okay, all these different things that that just doesn't feel right. So that's what sparks the study, and then you find out, is there oppression or not? Aaron, then John.
So looking at, before you get to this point, I mean, if you're doing a prior analysis of something, let's say plateauing in organizations where you've got, 100 and some odd employees that have hit a plateau but are still working there for 10 some odd years, and working through a critical analysis of why are they plateauing, or
And you may find out the reason they're plateauing is the cultural structure that's happened. There's no position for them to move up to. The people in those management positions that have been there for years still doing a good job. We can't fire them. They're not ready to retire. We can't retire them. We can't create another management position because we already have it. So we find out it's not that they're trying to oppress you. There's just nowhere for you to go unless you go to another organization.
Now another one I was thinking of, and it's kind of a different, you look at Ferguson. They were talking about the all-white police force and everything like that. Now, did they even look at did they even analyze it? Did they have any other racism apply for police officer positions? Were they rejected or anything like that to come up with a critical analysis? I mean, I'm just looking at that perspective as saying, well, no one ever applied. It was all white people.
And that's, again, that goes back to that's what you're looking at. Whenever I was a student here is when the Rodney King verdict came down, and the riots in Los Angeles, and then we had the riots here in town. And one of the demands that our African American students were making on campus was, we want to see more African American baseball players. We haven't had an African American on the baseball team in X number of years. Well, we have one on the baseball team. We want to see more. And the coach came out and said, I'm recruiting the best players. I don't care what color they are. I don't care what race they are. I'm recruiting the best players. And not to sound racist, but the African American baseball players who are good enough to play in college are going Division I or pro. They don't come here. We get the best of what's left in Division II. If you look across the board in Division II, most of Division II baseball is white males as opposed to Hispanic males or African American males. And so again, that's where some of the document analysis comes in to look at those types of things.
But once again, if you're interpreting and understanding the situation that a certain community is coming from, you're going to understand if they have a lack of means to get to places where they could apply to be a police officer or where they could apply to go to college. You have to look at those things as well without saying, like, for example, like that coach saying that he's recruiting the best, but not necessarily everyone is graduating high school. Not necessarily everyone is like even making it through like the first sets of your education, like.
Or even if you did,
right.
I Division II baseball, I've got four full ride scholarships to spread among 30 or 40 players.
Right.
I can only give you a partial, and even at that, you can't afford to come study.
Right, you have to, I feel like the point of the critical analysis is to, like what you said, critique and change, but when you interpret and understand, you find the root of the cause, and that's how you change.
Yeah, you need to critique, I say critique and change, but you first need to find out, do we need to change? Does something happen? Does something need to happen? You think about the early days of Christianity, who had the power? The church. Why? Because education. They could read, and they told the masses, this is what you believe, this is why you do this. And then what happened to change that?
Printing press.
The Gutenberg press came out. And now everybody, did you say Google? Did you say Google?
Gutenberg, but
Oh.
Gutenberg.
Yeah. The printing press came out, and so the Bible became printed and was in mass print. And the population became more educated, and they started reading the Bible going, wait a minute. That is not at all what this says. You've been telling me to do this. This is what it tells me. Okay? And so you look and see, that's another part of it, is where there was oppression and then it stopped, what happened to make that change, so we can see, is that something we replicate? Is that something we bring into it?
And I was going to say also, with regards to what you were talking about, letting people know that they're oppressed, things like that. So if you are in the majority and you see a community, let's say women who are paid less on the dollar than men, and you are a white male, are you supposed to be like, oh, well, they're happy making 77 cents on the dollar? and not say anything to them and not inform them that you are aware of this information, that you are aware that they are being oppressed, even if they seem like they are happy in a certain state. I feel like there is a confusion there often that people make where they're like, oh, well, if you're happy the way you are, I don't need to ruin that for you. But let's be honest, if you're talking about a gigantor community of people, a gender of people that are being oppressed, and let's say, yeah, you can be happy in your job, but if you're looking at interpreting and understanding an entire community, you're going to want to work to make that community equal.
Well, and that goes back to what Fryer was talking about, that the oppressor is oppressed. Because if I'm the boss and I am not paying my women as well as I'm paying my men, are they going to be as productive? If they don't know they're unhappy, maybe. But as time goes along, we got to give people credit, even if they are uneducated. Somewhere along the line, they're going to be like, no, wait a minute. Okay? Then they may not be as happy. They may not stay. Then I have to pay more to train others. Whereas if I will promote them and pay them well, and maybe let them have the management position and realize, being female doesn't mean you're less. You may have much better ideas than some of the males we have. You may be more creative, or you may work harder, okay? I'm keeping my own company down because I'm looking with glasses on that leaders, followers, as opposed to John Rawls' veil of ignorance. I'm looking for the best I can find. Doesn't care, don't matter what race they are, don't matter what color they are, don't matter what gender they are, none of that. And then I have the best position, the best person in that position, my company grows, and I succeed.
I would just like to relate to what you just said. When you go and tell people, okay, you're unhappy, you kind of underestimate the intelligence.
I don't think you tell them they're unhappy.
Yeah, that's
It's not, the idea isn't to tell them they're unhappy. It's to find out, A, are you happy? B, what do you think of the position you're in? C, do you think it could be better?
Yeah, my question was really relating to who defines oppression. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The oppressed, or the person who thinks or sees the oppression and wants to act on it, as John stated. And I, that's the thing that is sort of.
And I feel like it varies. I feel like it varies.
Well, ultimately, for our purposes here, who's going to make that definition? The researcher. Either by something he or she has observed, by just blatant curiosity, by the oppressed coming to that person or speaking out and watching in the news and reading articles and seeing people's reactions and how it's happened, and then coming to the researcher saying there seems to be something here, and then they get into the research. So it's really not Jeff comes to me and says, hey, we in the military, we're oppressed, let's do a study on it. He might say that, but where do you get that? Why do you think that? And we start working through it and say, okay, let's go with this.
Is critical analysis only concerned with changing the present, or are they ever concerned with, say, making amends for the past?
It's more about changing the present.
Okay.
And that amends could be a method of it, though.
Do what?
And that will make amends for the past.
And yeah, with the intent of, we can't do anything about the past, but learn from it.
Like, what I was thinking was, last semester, one of my friends, classmates, was writing a paper about how women in art have not been represented. Like, they either went under pseudonyms that were male, or the male artists of the day got credit for their work. And so now there are textbooks that are trying to backtrack and give credit to women, but they're not sure if they should look at women's art and men's art together, or if they should give them their own textbook and their own separate studies. Like, they don't know how to resolve
And
the
by
issue.
doing that, are they oppressing them?
Right.
We want to give you your due. We want to say we're sorry for what we did, and we want to reward you by recognizing you now.
Right.
But now you're singling me out and not including me with this group. Like,
Right.
I have to have
that's
my
the
own.
issue.
Yeah.
And so I thought this is all in the past because now female artists are getting credit for what they do, and they have been for the past several decades. But before that, what happened to them, and how do we give them credit now? How do we fix that? So I thought, is that making amends for the past, or is that also, could that also
Well,
be
what is critical analysis doing with the information from the past?
interpreting it and understanding it?
Interpreting it,
and
understanding it, trying to learn from it, so we know, are we still doing it?
Mhm.
And if so, why? Are we not doing it? If we're not doing it anymore, what led to that point, so we make sure we don't go that way again? Okay, you know, my wife and I go around on this a lot of times, and speaking of labor relations, and we share a lot of the same political ideologies, and I'm not telling you what mine are, because we talk, you know, back and forth just to debate, just for the sake of debating. But why doesn't the government give up regulating business and let business regulate itself? And then you can make the argument, well, when business regulated itself, it didn't pay a fair wage. They weren't always, the practices weren't always safe. Equipment wasn't always safe. Men and women weren't necessarily paid or promoted along the same lines. So business hasn't really shown its ability to regulate itself. And the other side of that said, well, now we have laws in place so that that can't happen. And then you come back to the other side and you say, well, yeah, but if business is in power and they're the ones making the money, then they're probably going to be able to be the ones to elect who goes into office, and then they can get those laws repealed. So that's what you're looking for, is what happened in the past so we don't repeat the errors of the past.
Business didn't regulate itself well for profit, but not for the workers at all. Especially, one case I'm interested in is the West Virginia union movement. We had the rednecks, that's where it came from, trying to organize so that they could barter with the steel companies and coal companies, so they'd have a little bit of even playing field. We're all, you will find one of us, we're all gone. So they organized, and then they brought in Pinkerton detectives who were really thugs and what detectives all to start shooting them. So it's probably good to have government saying, hey, you can't go shoot people for trying to organize.
Not a bad idea. You're right. But you have to look at the history of what happened before so we don't make those mistakes again. So we don't say, okay, government, we've got it now. You know, we're paying fair wages, and our practices are safer. You go away, we can repeal those laws, because then business may go back the other way and say, see, we're not required to do it, we won't do it. I'm not going to give you benefits. I'm not going to pay you even wages. I'm not going to make sure that the vehicles that you're traveling in are up to specs and are safe. But the idea, the big thing to remember is the idea behind critical analysis is to, yes, interpret and understand, but this is the method where we want to make a change. Either we need to, I say we want to make a change. We either need to find that there is oppression and fix it, or that there isn't oppression, or it's not intended to be oppression. This is the problem. Now do something about it.
Do you usually, in your research, make create like solutions for it, or you do your research
Yes.
and reapply somewhere?
No, what you're trying to do is find out what the problem is so you can find the solution. That's the goal in critical analysis.
So you come up with a solution in your research?
Yeah. I will tell you that Dr. Newsom in our department, Dr. Atkinson in our department, to a lesser degree Dr. Price in our department, do a lot with critical analysis. They're good ones to talk to. Again, it's one that I'm interested in from that perspective right there. But you can see that there's all kinds of different areas where it can apply. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
So these 4 points you have on the side, I understand that for the first 3, but with the last one, is that?
That's not one of them. That's more of a
method
of it.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Okay,
more of how we gathered the information.
Okay.
It's more just you get participants to be involved.
Do you think like the in-depth interview would be a good
Yeah.
use? Because you're gonna look at.
And you're not necessarily,
And the oppressor.
yeah.
Interview them both.
And you're not necessarily gonna be asking the exact same questions to everybody because, you know, I mean, males and females may be feeling oppressed in different ways, and you may have to look into that part of it.
And it will always analyze power itself. Okay,
You have to analyze the power,
okay.
because that's only by analyzing the power can you know who is being oppressed, who is being discriminated against, why that is the case, and what way is it happening. Wouldn't you hate to be the person in power? I often think of this. When you hate to be the person in power, and somebody tells you, and you come to find out you've been oppressing a group and you didn't intend to. That's just the way it's always been, and I don't really know any different, and my dad grew up in Tennessee, and there was a lot of racism where he grew up and when he grew up, and I would ask him about it, and he did some racist things. And I asked him, he said, "Joe, that's just what we do." At the same time, one of my best friends was African American, and we went to a soda shop, and he said, "I have to go around the back door," and I said, "Why?" And he didn't get it. But it was nothing for them to light tires on fire and roll them down into the black part of town, just to be pranksters. That's where the black part of town was at the bottom of the hill. You can't roll the tire up the hill. We just rolled it into the bottom of town. And were they being racist about it? Were they just doing it to be ornery? That's just what was done.
Criminal, not ornery.
Well, yes. Okay. When the whole thing with the race riots was happening in town, I had a lot of people saying, "Well, I didn't oppress them and I didn't do this." Again, I am a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male. I don't know what it is to be oppressed. I have Irish descent. Okay, they were oppressed, but that was a long time ago, and I don't remember any of it. No, my relatives don't remember any of it. I don't really know what it is to be oppressed. So it's hard for me to relate. But I have to keep in mind, am I doing anything to oppress others? Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, can you do like Native American analysis here too?
Oh, sure.
Like,
Any class at all, any group at all.
okay.
Do you know of any sort of mixed method studies that have been done with sort of biology and the whole survival of the fittest model with this?
I don't.
I'm just sitting back here thinking my wheels are spinning. Like, does the lion oppress the wildebeest? You know what I'm saying? Because of this survival of the fittest sort of thing. Is it innate, natural, nurture?
Is it built into us that way?
Yeah, it just started racing through my head.
When you think about and I've not studied all the cultures, but when you think about the relationships between males and females,
Sure.
virtually every culture that I know of from the beginning of existence of mankind, man was the hunter-gatherer, and therefore he was the dominant gender. And therefore, Michael, you disagree.
That
But
old
that's
paradigm's been shot down, that men were once hunting, everybody was hunting.
Okay,
Oh, cool.
so there you go. But how well known is that?
Apparently not very.
Exactly. Okay, but in most cultures, the male was the one who made the decision. The male was the head of the household. The male was the one that was going out and working and things, and that was what was expected. And so, but we need to. That's the sort of thing that if we don't know it, we're doomed to
Men
repeat
are
it.
bigger than women, took over their society, changed their female god to a male god, and said, God says women are less than men, and they use that forever.
Right, so it'll be to interpret.
But still, if you go back to
Critique
biology,
and shape.
the fact that you just admitted size differential and strength differential and its biology is different. It just makes me think about these things that, is there some sort of innate?
And the burning of witches was women who stood up for their rights.
I think that all of this is very compelling, but what makes humans better is the fact that we can get beyond these like natural norms that maybe men are biologically better than women. That doesn't mean that they need to be treated worse.
Dr. Atkins and I got into this last year debating about, I'm saying that all people are
I'm not saying that.
equal. We all have equal value, we all have equal purpose, and she said, no, which shocked the dickens out of me. No, we're not. You're stronger than I am, you're bigger than I am, you've got more value. I said, Carol, you're smarter than I am. You know, it's 6 in one hand, half dozen of the other. In a physical fight, if I have to build something, you want me. If I have to debate and match wits against somebody else, I'm coming to you.
Right, exactly.
You know?
Its strengths and weaknesses brought together for the common good, yeah. It's interesting.
But the stronger physical form over the weaker female physical form, and the man using that to usurp power forever is oppression. And the women, I started to say earlier, the women who tried to stand up for themselves throughout history, labeled witches, burned. So the young women learned, shut up, you gotta be docile if you want to survive.
But you talk about that with the Salem witch trials, a lot of that went to try to oppress the Indians, because they thought the Native Americans were the demons, and they were in league with the Indians. They were trying to support them and encourage them, so they must be witches along with them. So, Sarah?
I was gonna note on the physical differences between male and female. You ask a sports person or a physician, I don't know, ask someone who's in that field and they'll tell you that women generally have stronger legs and not so much arm strength. And that, can backtrack to the fact that, at some point in time of our lives, the majority of women have to carry around, 15, 20, 50 more pounds of weight, and then yeah.
Push out a baby.
Yeah.
Working out of my body.
So now what I learned from this is I could kick your 5 pounds.
Well, I've got a friend.
Use your legs.
Sarah brings up a great point that, there aren't many absolutes here. I have a good friend who's into rock climbing. He said women are much better rock climbers than men because men have stronger upper bodies. And so we want to grab hold and pull ourselves up, and that wears out quickly. Women have stronger legs, so they rely on their legs. Rock climbing, you use your hands to hold on. You use your legs to climb. And he said, so women tend to be better rock climbers than men because they've figured this out. We men have too big of egos to figure it out.
Not all.
No. Captain, you have
I was gonna say that fencing too, like if you think about the female fencers and the male fencers, female fencers are much better in for the legs and the footwork that they do to stab people.
But at the same time, we have to be careful in getting into these discussions. Yeah. Because there have been people who have come out and said that African Americans are better athletes because the Achilles tendon, they're faster. The Achilles tendon in the African American is elongated versus the Caucasian American. So therefore, they're faster. They're built to be better athletes. Jimmy the Greek, I believe it was, got fired. Great analyst in sports said that the African American athlete was far superior to the white athlete because he came out of the jungle swinging through the trees like the monkeys and made himself stronger, therefore he was more...
Yeah, that was what I was...
And you're like, whoa! I'm trying to find these reasons why when that was as oppressive as there ever was.
I'm sorry.
Sarah?
Well, going into African Americans, I guess they're, I don't want to say heritage, but their ancestry, if they were forced over, the Atlantic, generally the people that they brought over were bigger, were stronger, because they thought of them as livestock, basically.
They were bred that way. They were bred to be stronger.
Yeah.
Also survival of the fittest, they're the ones who survived the slave ships.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but when I was taking religious studies. The instructor, I think he's from Africa, I don't remember. He was actually born there, and he was like, the African people are actually quite small. That's what he said, and you know, I think of African Americans, and you see a lot of tall, really big African American guys, and African American women are usually sometimes taller, and it's just.
You think of Ethiopians, is it Ethiopians and Nigerians are great distance runners.
Kenyans.
Kenyans, thank you. And a lot of people want to look at that and say, well, yeah, they're African. Has nothing to do with their African. It has to do with their culture. They just run. That's one of the things that from a young age, they run. And that's where they get from point A to point B, and they run great distances. And so you get a lot of young men and women who find the marathon to be appealing and a way to get out. And now I got Chase going to chime in here, and he's a track and field distance coach.
Yeah, one of the things I'm learning is that it's, because when I first started running, I was like, oh, all Kenyans are good distance runners. It's actually just one tribe of Kenyans.
Really?
Yeah, and so it's, because at first I found out that it's called like the KIP tribe, or that's what I call them. They have KIP in their name. It could be their first name, middle name, or last name. Well, I've ran against some Kenyans who don't have that in their name, and they're terrible runners, really slow. But then these other Kenyans who have that KIP in their name, amazing All-American runners.
But then, just like what we're talking about right here, well, you're Kenyan, you must be a great distance runner. Well, you're 6'9", you must be a wonderful basketball player.
Yep.
Are we oppressing them by classifying them because of where they're from, their size, their gender? Okay.
I was about to say what you just said, so never mind.
Side note, I took weightlifting in high school, and I was in the class, there was 5 girls including me, and all of them were basketball players, except for me. I was just in it because I played softball, and I was like, it's another class, whatever. And they all played wonderfully, and we were doing, what is it, the one where you gently touch the ball? And I got the exact same jumping height as one of the basketball player girls, and she was like, really? Because she trains to be able to jump really high, but she couldn't. And she was just astounded that me, who trains to, hit a ball and run for 60 feet and then stop, could jump as high as she could. But, genetics.
Yeah.
What I'm doing.
And that's, that's what you got to get right down to. I used to, my strength coach when I was in college, I kept saying, I'm plateauing at the same weight. I'm not getting any bigger. What's the problem? He goes, you need to go home and punch your dad. I said, what? He said, you work harder than anybody on the team. You're here all the time. I know you're putting in the effort. You've got bad genes. I said, my dad was a great athlete. He goes, all right, go smack your mom then. Somebody didn't pass it down. I didn't. But a lot of what we look at intellectually, physically, things that are used to oppress is not because of what class they are or what group they are in. It's just genetic. And if we'll look past what color they are, what their socioeconomic background is, what gender, we could see the value in every person. And so that's the idea behind critical analysis, is why are they being held back? We generally assume, and this goes to kind of, again, what Bud was talking about, in education tends to be what, conservative or liberal? Liberal. Politically, the liberal mindset thinks what? Spread the wealth, give everybody a chance, balance of power, be fair, okay? This group over here, and the conservative side says, well, if you work hard and work your way up there, I'm sorry, I was born in a upper middle class family. I had a heck of a lot easier time getting to be a PhD than the young man who grew up in the ghetto with a single parent. It's gonna be a lot easier for me. Yes, that young man or woman can work hard and climb to the place where I am. I had a few more advantages.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Doctor, but at the same time, the people born in better circumstances are less motivated. So even though people who are born poor, they look at people with less abilities to reach high level. I think they're more motivated.
I could argue the other way. I'm born down here, I don't have a chance, why bother? Versus, it's expected of me. I didn't have a choice, I was going to college. It was expected of me. I was motivated to get there because it was expected versus, I don't have a chance. It's, again, it's all on the individual. Barack Obama was pretty motivated to get from where he was to be the President of the United States. I wasn't too motivated to become President of the United States, but I had an easier path to get to where I am here than he did.
I could compare societies as well, because when I came to England, I kind of realized that people are kind of lazy. To them, like, oh, I'm working hard. And with all respect, United States is exactly the same. People say, oh, we're working so hard, we're working all day. Oh my God. And I just look, so what did you do? I was on the till all day selling. To you, is it hard? And I had this conversation with someone from Bulgaria, and he said, you're thinking that you're working hard and you criticize people from UK. Come to Bulgaria, and you're going to see. So I think it's just a matter of perspective as well.
I'm going to show my ignorance. And you're from Mexico, right, Catherine?
Yeah.
Siesta is pretty common in Mexico, or is that Spain?
No, it depends. For the people that live in the city, like the siestas are like, are you kidding me? You have to work hard every day, all day.
Okay.
So it's kind of like, but in small towns, it's pretty common.
But-
The siesta. Yeah.
But we might look at it and say, well, Mexico, they take those siestas. Well, we don't realize it's not everybody. And even if it were everybody, they take those siestas and go, man, we're working hard through the day. I have a friend who works construction, and he said, you know, all these people that are complaining about Mexicans coming up and taking our jobs, they're not taking our jobs, they're doing the jobs that we don't want to do, that we think we're too good for. And they work hard, and they're good at it. It's that perception that you have, and that's where you find out, are they being oppressed because of my perception?
Yeah.
I need to go study this and find out, and then find out how can we fix it. I'm sorry, let me put the air real quick. You have something for a second?
No, I was just gonna make a quick note on, I guess you go back maybe 15, 20 years, and I think they created more opportunities for people to make those leaps and jumps into getting into universities or getting better jobs. Whereas today, I think they create more of a lessened standard.
A lower standard to get there?
Yeah, a lower standard today than they do creating more opportunity.
Free junior college for everybody?
Right, you know, stuff like that. Or
Which looks like a good idea, that those people who are oppressed, who don't have the means, like John was saying, to get an education, we're gonna make junior college free and let them get here. But is that gonna lower the quality of the education? Is that gonna
See, I think
be
it
damaging the other way?
goes back to the amount of money they give to high schools. You know, look at how much money is raised in the state of Missouri, how much is set aside for education in high school, and you look at what schools get the most money. You know, I grew up in Lamar, Missouri. We didn't get jack squat. They do probably, 40, 50, 60 fundraisers a year just to buy things for school. Whereas you go to certain schools in the good side of town of St. Louis or Kansas City or Jefferson City, which probably gets a shit ton, and then you leave out all these other schools where now they're behind 2 years, the same grade level as at Jeff City.
One of the most misquoted scriptures. Money is the root of all evil. No, the love of money is the root of all evil, is what is the scripture, is what it says.
All kinds.
Meaning that, huh?
All kinds of people,
Of all
not even
kinds.
all evil.
Of all kinds of people. That if we're focused on this, it can lead to all kinds of evil because we're trying to make money, and to do that, we're having to perform evil to oppress other people. Could be. Mom and then Crispin.
I work blue collar, I've been retired, so I was not working amongst the intellectual elites. As a matter of fact, intellectual elites were denigrated amongst most of the people I worked with. But I would hear one guy.
I worked construction for a summer and the same thing. Yeah, college boy.
You hear somebody say, please don't bring at me, Catherine. The Mexicans are damn lazy. 5 minutes later, the Mexicans are stealing our jobs. Are they lazy? Are they stealing your jobs?
Make up your mind.
kind of piggyback off of what he was saying. I remember when I first started teaching, I was like, what is this level? Because I would get these levels of papers. I'm like, how did you not learn this in high school? You know, and so my initial thought was, what's, you know, why aren't they teaching that? And then when I came to realize and talked more to high school teachers, they're like, you know, we're doing the best we can, but it's the fact that above us, you know, they tell the schools you have to move these kids on, you have to accept late work, you more or less have to pass on most of the students because it looks better that you're having a higher graduation percentage than you were before. Yeah, exactly. And so I don't know, I guess that was just kind of a critical thing that I had, you know, I'd made this assumption and then I realized, oh wow, it goes so much deeper, you know, and even more deep than that, I'm sure, but I just don't know.
So I would just like to point it out that we use the word probably over here as a researcher. I don't think is allowed because the schools in other part of the town probably get more money. And this situation we portray the school as a better, even though we don't have a proof. So I would just careful. That's what I want to point it out. If we speculate, that's a whole gray area that leads to many very, very bad conclusions. So if we have facts, okay, let's go with it.
But that's what we're after. We've got to start with the probably or possibly to go do the research to find that.
In critical analysis, you can't go into it with any sort of, like, your own conclusions that you're looking to make, right? Because then what if you were looking for something and then
You're trying to force it?
You're not only trying to force it, but look for something that maybe isn't there because that's what you were wanting or expecting to see. Do you have to be careful with that, especially in critical analysis? Or
give me right ethics back up there. It's as with any research method, anything we do, we have a preconceived notion and we have a bias in what we believe. We have to be aware of that because our search is for what is actually there or what it appears to us so that we can go from there, okay? Again, this is a qualitative method. We're not searching for truth. We've got to interpret it and understand it so we can critique it and bring about change. We may be dead wrong. We may find out that it's not that they're being oppressed, or they are maybe being oppressed, but not because power's oppressing them. It's that they're not being active enough in educating themselves. They have a voice, they have a vote, but they're not taking advantage of it. They're not using it.
So you have to have a perception of where the power lies.
Yes.
Before you start. You can't.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you're going to have to start there. Okay. The big thing to be aware of is what you believe and where you are. I believe in this. Okay? But I also know that I was given a brain for a reason. To not look at that and say, this is what you do, this is how you do it, because he said so. I have to try and interpret what did he mean when he said so. Okay? And am I doing it the way he said? Okay? As a Christian, I follow the words of Jesus. And Jesus said to love one another, to love your enemies. I can't love you if I'm oppressing you. So I'm not going to go on a crusade. And I'm not going to wipe out all the Jews. And I'm not going to burn all the people I think are witches. That's not my job. I don't want to be able to I don't want to stand in front of him one day and say, Lord, Lord, and him say, you never knew me. That's where you have to be as a researcher, is to find, okay, what do I believe? Whether it's that, whether it's the Quran, whether it's natural history or natural world, anything. What do I believe? Who do I think is oppressing? Who do I think is being oppressed? And what do we do about it? That's the essence of critical analysis. Okay? Thus ends your sermon for the day. That